Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneider, joined as always by my co-host Nick Filato. Losing my voice a little, but I'm fired up because I had a lot of fun, Nick. I'm fired up. I had a lot of fun watching Hard Knocks Episode 1 Giants, and I think part of that fun for me was obviously because it's our Giants and we get to see this inside scoop. Like, it's crazy to see Joe Schoen have these conversations. The people who are in the room, Brian Daboll wasn't even in the room for a lot of these conversations, which also surprised me. Just a ton of things we're going to get into in the show, but it's just cool to see that of your own show. And I will say this unbiased, not because we're watching the Giants. This is a much more fun version of Hard Knocks to me than the training camp version that we've seen for the last 6 years from NFL Films and from HBO. I'm just not that interested in these dumb training camp practices. We've seen already what training camp can be with the Giants. We know very well. Last year, lights out offense in training camp. They couldn't move the football. 2 years ago, the offense can't move the ball. They had their best offensive season in like 5 years. So, we know training camp is what it is. But this is cool stuff. We're learning about the process of building this roster in the offseason, the conversation they had. So I absolutely love the first episode. And then I saw today, Nick, from Art Stapleton, that we're going to like the second episode even better. So I'm pretty amped up we're getting this content.
I'm pretty amped up about it too. What I loved probably, I would say equally to what I watched on Hard Knocks is people's takes on Twitter about it and how different they are and how people are arguing about certain things and how certain people are just, I would say, have completely different interpretations or are looking very far into things where there might not be something there, but it adds to the fun. Because right now, Dan, this is the most boring part of the NFL calendar. So now, at least as one of the 32 teams, we can talk about this as a fan base, and we can kind of get a little glimpse, which I found very interesting, into Joe Schoen's process and the front office process, which is pretty clandestine. Probably isn't the right word, but it's not something that is open to people like you and me or anybody who really watches football.
That's the cool part, because we were talking about this before the show, and I'm like, yeah, a lot of these things we assumed, Nick, that they were operating under, like, for example, as we'll get to, like Joe Schoen's discussions about the running back position, the price of it, the market, paying guys not 27, the studies that say once they're 27, you don't pay them, all that stuff, which we'll get into. We assumed all that, but we didn't know it for sure. And now there's like actual proof. These are the conversations they have, which is crazy to me and also cool. And like you said, we're at a stage of the offseason where we need something. We need something to get excited about this team, I think, because we can do all the preview shows and they're fun, but this is real stuff. And I do agree with you about the reactions. I've seen some fun ones. And I will say this to all those reactions. Just keep in mind a few things. One, the Giants have final say over everything HBO airs. Two, I'm not going to report how, but I've heard that some players have some say over what's going on and what's not in the show. And wouldn't be new, because that's happened on previous Hard Knocks where players have had say too over what gets aired. And three, what Dan Duggan said, which is it did very much so feel like at least one or two of those conversations were for the camera. The first one, Nick, being the conversation Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll had one-on-one about hiring Shane Bowen. They essentially talked about, like, here, Brian Daboll's reading him off stats, like, already just before making the call. Like, first of all, we know, like, days went into this process of deciding on who to hire him. It wasn't like a last-second Hail Mary from Daboll, like, take a look at these run defense stats and these third down stats. And Shane's like, all right, make the call. We got our guy. Like, decision was made before that, so that one felt a little fake. And I kind of feel like the Joe Schoen one with Brandon Brown and I forget who else, maybe McDonald, about Daniel Jones felt a little kind of just maybe for the cameras as well. Like, he's reeling off his injury history and all these things that, like, these two dudes in the room obviously know all of. Like, he's breaking no ground to them whatsoever. So people have looked into a lot, like you said, have read into it and had takes on social media. But I almost feel like what you said may be true. Like, it might be reading a little too much into it.
When you have final say over the editorial process, you're not going to really allow anything that journalists would jump at and want to write a story. I think there are a lot of cool key takeaways, i.e. how Isaiah Simmons is going to be used, even though we probably figured he would be used in a role like Shane Bowen said, where he is probably going to be a money down backer on third down, and how linebackers are very important. I thought, like, listening to Shane Bowen talk about his defense, those are things that we have assumed over the last, 3 months or so, 4 months. But now we're starting to hear him mention Ryder Anderson's name and Boogie Basham. Is Boogie Basham going to be a bigger deal? I would argue, just listening to them talk about the defensive line free agents when they were bringing up Chris Jones and when they were bringing up Christian Wilkins, and they were talking about pairing Dexter Lawrence with an interior defensive lineman, an attacking penetrator. And they're like, yeah, Christian Wilkins, he's not really, like, I think Chris Rossetti, who came off looking well there, but I think he said something to the effect of, he's not really a great pass rusher. And then I was like, who do the Giants have on their roster who's half a Christian Wilkins who can play next to Dexter Lawrence? Nobody. Nobody. Absolutely nobody.
And I know that from what you said, at least, Dexter Lawrence, for what they said on the show, Dexter Lawrence, great friends with Christian Wilkins. They're like actual like best friends. Saw two cases of that, by the way. Like the trade the Giants made with Dan Morgan, by the way, the Carolina Panthers GM, after Joe Shane showed that whole thing where like his family's going on vacation and stuff, I was like, we got a soft, like he did not, I'm doubting that Morgan pushed back that hard. I mean, it went from, they were offered 2-1s from the Rams 2 off seasons ago to him suggesting, and some people say as a joke, Morgan at the at the East West Shrine, whatever that was, let's do a 1 and something, to getting it down to just a 2 and a 5. Like that's a big jump down to go from the 1 to the 2 there. And the 5 is like, and something that ends something is a 5. So maybe that relationship played a role. I think Bobby Skinner had this take, or someone had this take, Nick, and I agree 100% with it. It's a great take. The best part of Joe Shane's tenure so far has been the way he's traded. Everything he's done in the trade market. Every single trade to me has been shrewd. He's done a great job with all of them, from this to the Leonard Williams. Like this is where he understands how to do this role of general manager the best. And obviously it's only one part of the job, but I was really impressed watching him kind of talk there. And I'm sure we're going to get more of that when we get to the draft, though I'm sure they won't show everything on that.
No, they shouldn't. But you could also look at the flip side, just to play devil's advocate, and people would throw a lot of cold water on the Darren Waller trade. I'm not one of those people, but I understand why someone did, right? Like it was a calculated risk. We brought it up back then. If you want to surround Daniel Jones with pass catchers, you're not going to be able to go out and get a T. Higgins or a Brandon Ayuk. Might as well bring in Darren Waller and assume the risk, because your training staff was so superior around the league to limiting those soft tissue injuries. It didn't really happen last season, but I understand the risk.
I hear you, Nick, on that funny front, but I think this is more an issue with the player that they couldn't have predicted before they traded for him. Because to be honest, it's like Joe Shane always says, when we go through the interview process and the draft, we get to know these players, and that's why we spend the time we spent on these players. He didn't get that with Darren Waller, so it's just kind of a trade, not knowing, and the guy decides to retire a year after the trade at 29 or 30 years old. Like it's just so hard for me to blame a GM for that. And in addition to that, I still want people to keep in perspective, Nick. They gave up pick 100. What comes of pick 100 in the NFL? I guarantee you, if we look at the last 20 pick 100s in the NFL, we're going to struggle to find consistent starters for more than 2 or 3 seasons across the board. There'll be maybe 1 or 2 in the last, I'm going to go as far as 20 drafts. That's just a guess based on the history, but that's at 100 pick, maybe a little higher, 4, 5, 6 starters, maybe at most, but I highly doubt that. So to me, it's a small cost. The opportunity cost just wasn't there, because Brandon Ayuk, like you mentioned, that's a first-round pick if you want him. That's what the 49ers are asking. So it is what it is on that front, but it was cool to see that process.
Yeah, I agree, man. So where do we want to go next?
Maybe, you know what? Let's get to the big one, the Saquon Barkley one. Should we get there?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's talk some Saquon
Where to start on that? Because there's like 3 different things I want to talk on. What struck you the most on that? Let's start there.
We've been kind of talking about it a lot on this podcast over the last 3 years, that once you start getting up to 26, 27, and you have a lot of injuries, you typically don't get paid by teams who are allocating $40 million to their quarterback position and have a shitty roster. So, and Joe Shane brought it up, I think 2 times, maybe 2 or 3 times, how Daniel Jones is making $40 million and how Saquon Barkley has been injured and how it's not a net positive move. He said, I don't want a $40 million quarterback a year handing the football off to a $12 million running back. It's basically saying, like, Daniel Jones, the ball is really in your court right now. And we are honestly going to do everything in our power to protect you with a better offensive line. And we also saw, they opened the show during the draft with Joe Shane saying something like, oh, Malik Neighbors, be there. So you got that star playmaker who can play wide receiver now for Daniel Jones. And now it's, hey, we're either out of this contract next year with Daniel Jones. He brought up, we have him under contract for the next 3 years. He also mentioned, like, this is going to be the guy for the next 10 years. So it's, again, Dan, I know it sounds crazy, but it's another like, hey, Daniel Jones, go out there and prove it. This is like the 5th year in a row, but I think it's very safe to say that he has not had a great situation. Hopefully this one will be better.
Yeah, and you hope that, and it could be. I mean, we expect it to be, right? Malik Neighbors should be surefire. I guess in a lot of ways, it does all come down to the offensive line taking the jump we need, which to me, again, Nick, like, we'll talk about this more in the next few weeks and then obviously through training camp and the preseason, but it's annoying to me, dude, that, like, I'm most worried about Evan Neal. Like, why should that should not be my biggest worry, dude? If anything, I should have less worry about a 6th overall pick that looked great on tape in college at Alabama than even like John Runyon, who's proven some of the NFL level, but isn't like a star. Like, that should be your rock there. And it's just, that to me is still the one I want to see, especially now with him coming back slow off the ankle injury. But back to the Barkley part of it. What I thought was interesting, and we talked about this before, and I could have assumed it, Nick, but I really thought that conversation at the Combine, or not the Combine, I think that was the East West Shrine, between Joe Shane and Frank Gore, which is so funny, by the way, because Frank Gore joined the Bills super late super late into his career, helped them scout and find Devin Singletary, as Joe Shane mentioned. Like they found him as like a mid-round pick. But Frank Gore was insanely productive late into his career. And Joe Shane just standing there right in front of his face being like, yeah, he's like, what do you think of Barkley? He's like, nah, 27. Like, he's like, and I thought it was Shane had it right off top. He's like, he had 900 carries combined at Penn State, 900 touches. He's got this injury, that injury, that injury. He's 27. And the agent next to him goes, I heard, and this is what the agent says, I heard that that you guys say at 27, once you hit that number, no more. You can't pay the guy. And Joe Shane goes, yeah, there's a study. And that study we've cited before on this podcast. Like 3 straight years. We cited that. Like, I put it on Twitter. People are going nuts about it. They're like, this is bullshit. This is a fake study. I don't believe this. No NFL team would ever use this study. And we literally heard Joe Shane citing it in this episode. So I thought that to me was just wild to hear.
That coupled with Joe Shane mentioning like, oh, I've lost like 10 years off my life dealing with the Saquon Barkley contract situation last year. Also with the fact that we got a snippet of another episode that's coming in the future of Joe Shane saying like, hey, Barkley, you're going to give us a chance. It seems like it was a burden weighing on Joe Shane because Joe Shane probably had some sort of internal conflict, understanding how important Saquon Barkley is to New York, to this franchise, to that team, to that locker room, and how all of those are important, but also he is an aging running back with an injured history with a quarterback now making so much money. So I think Barkley leaving, I'm sure he didn't want him to go to the Philadelphia Eagles, but Barkley leaving did kind of take a little bit off of his shoulders. A little bit of a burden might have left him. But at the same time, there were some little contradictions. And I think Dan Duggan pointed this out, but it was very obvious too, when just watching the show, where he was talking to John Mara about, yeah, we can find people later in free agency. We can be patient on the running back market. You know, it's a saturated market right now. But on day one, they went out and they're like, no, Devin Singletary is our guy. Boom. And they just like locked Singletary up real quick.
Yeah, that was really interesting. And I ultimately think that probably has a lot to do with the running back market developing much faster than Joe Shane said or assumed, than their team assumed it would. Because, for example, like you have to play the market. If you have a projection going in, like, oh, the running back market will be dry, we'll wait to the second level, and things change. It's just like an auction fantasy draft. You know this, Nick, because you play these. Things change in the auction. Dynamic can change really fast, and you have to adjust on the fly. If you stay with your original strategy, you're screwed. So, first day of free agency, first moments, DeAndre Swift signs that big deal with the Bears, that multi-year deal. Came out right away.
He was on the list.
Boom, sparks the market. Because once that one contract's in, every single other contract shapes around that. So now you're thinking, well, I thought I could just chill on this thing and we'd see contracts trickle in over the next few days. And then I'd be like on day 8, like, hey, you still haven't been signed. Let's do it. And then he's a little bit worried. So I actually like that move.
I'm not saying I don't like the move either.
No, I know that. Yeah.
But DeAndre Swift, too, was on the Giants list of running backs they were breaking down, along with Tony Pollard, along with Devin Singletary, along with Zach Moss.
Austin Eckler.
Austin Eckler's name came up. But I think that's a really good point. And there was something that was said, and I don't remember exactly who said it. It might have been Joe Shane, but it was like, yeah, Devin Singletary, like he could be re-signed by Houston. And it was like intimated that he said something to that effect because he basically usurped Dameon Pierce.
Right.
So that also played into it. And they just really, Brian Dable and the coaching staff valued Devin Singletary as a replacement to Saquon Barkley for this team at obviously a much cheaper price. So maybe that's one reason why they were just like, all right, screw it. We're not going to wait. We're just going to go out and get a guy that we're very comfortable with.
Love that point you just made because that stood out to me in the episode when he's like, this guy won the job in Houston. Like he was not supposed to win the job. He was going as the 2. They were going to use him as a 2 all year, and he earned the right to be the 1. I also thought you mentioned earlier Rossetti came off looking great in this episode. I thought his best moment by far was part of the early episode, Rossetti, when the Giants were talking about Saquon Barkley's market, and Rossetti was like, look, he's still the only difference maker on this market. I don't care about, and they're like, Josh Jacobs, didn't he lead the NFL in rushing 1 year? He's like, yeah, 2 years ago. He's like, this is the difference maker on the market. And he said, for us, it doesn't make sense. For a team like the Eagles, who have an offensive line and the luxury of this, it does make sense. I thought that point was so perfect because, like, it's the point I've been trying to make on Twitter, but people don't understand it because they're going to, when Barkley has an amazing year, the Eagles are going to come back like, the Giants were such idiots. They were so wrong for letting him go without even understanding that they're saying this at the same time while they always complain about the offensive line with Jones. The same people are probably going to be not factoring it in. I don't want to blame. It's okay. But like, remember, the offensive line for the Giants is still bad, and the offensive line for the Eagles is elite. So obviously, Saquon Barkley is going to have a good season there, which is what he was saying, Rossetti. I thought it was so interesting. He's like, to the Eagles, he's worth the money. To us, he's not. And that could easily be the case.
Yeah, he got a lot of face time. He's the director of pro scouting for the New York Giants, and free agency is his bag. And they talked a lot about free agency in this first episode. They were talking about the defensive lineman. Brian Burns' name came up. They were talking about the running back position. I wish we learned a little bit more about where they were looking cornerback wise. We didn't really get to see
Nothing on the
that.
corners.
Yeah, that's something I am interested in because I still think they could use an upgrade there. And if they actually mentioned certain names, then maybe we could have gained an idea of what Shane Bowen truly is looking at instead of assuming.
I got a little conspiracy theory mini. What if
Go.
the guys they're looking at are, and they had a whole segment like that, are still in the market and they don't want to give away their hand?
Oh, that's
But
100%.
they're airing it right
Oh,
now,
that wouldn't even
right?
be a
Yeah.
conspiracy theory. That's
Okay.
what happened. I mean, they obviously had the conversations.
Because
It's
those
not
guys
like
still be around.
you know.
Yeah. Right. Some would obviously be snapped up, but some of those guys could still be around. And one more point, a couple more points on the Barkley thing. One thing Joe Shane said, Nick, was we want to make sure, and this was smart, we want to make sure that we can take that 12 million and allocate it to the offensive line. That was something he was clear about in his conversation with John Mara. And we know the Eagles with Barkley are putting him behind a great offensive line. He doesn't want to put Barkley back behind a bad O-line. Joe Shane. He wants to put a good O-line out there and then put a different runner behind a good O-line. At this point, it can't be Barkley. That's fine. That's how the time played itself. It didn't time out right. Barkley never got a good O-line with the Giants. He's going to get one with the Eagles. But we got to give whoever that next back is a good O-line. And I like that he said, let's reallocate those 12 million resources to the offensive line.
Of course, and the offensive line helps the rushing game, but the essence of what he is also saying is we're paying a quarterback a lot of money. Let's let that quarterback be that quarterback too. Yeah, because that offensive line has been his biggest Achilles heel, and rightfully, right? I mean, look at what Daniel Jones has played behind his entire career. It has not been great. So let's actually fix this up, and we'll see if Jermaine Illuminor, John Runyon, Aaron Stinney, and Schlottman are guys who can help achieve that goal. I'm hoping. I'm more optimistic than I have been in past years where people thought the offensive line has been fixed, but I still don't know if it's going to be great because of Evan Neal, as you brought up. And he's the one who could
I'm fine on everyone else but Neal. That's the crazy part. I think Illuminor and Runyon, they're not going to be amazing, but they're going to do their jobs like pros. And that's going to help John Michael Schmitz because he's actually playing next to two pros. And that's fine. The interior, I think, is going to be pretty intact. Andrew Thomas, you never worry about. And this helps too because Andrew Thomas will be fully healthy. So we know he's going to get island responsibilities out there, which helps the rest of the line. Should help theoretically. But then it's that final piece, that Evan Neal piece on the outside. That's just the one that's killing me right now because he's coming off this stupid surgery and is not fully healthy yet. I don't love that.
Yeah, and I don't have delusions of grandeur about the interior offensive line. I just want them to be like league average, and I think they can be. Like John Runyon, I watched his tape with the Packers, and I was like a little bit indifferent. I was like, I get it because you need to bring in veteran offensive linemen, but he's not like this true huge difference maker. But he's going to be a massive upgrade over any of the guards that the Giants had last season, and that's all I think any Giant fans are looking for right now. But you spoke a little bit about Joe Shane and John Mara and their conversation, and that was pretty funny too because John Mara, he's like, best worlds, we get to keep Saquon Barkley. Like he was all about like kind of retaining Saquon Barkley, was talking about, and if we don't, we got to draft somebody high, draft the running back high. Because John Mara is definitely that guy in fantasy football. Like he's like your buddy who drafts like 3 running backs in a row.
Robust RB.
Robust RB. And then like he has 3 wide receivers he has to start, and his starting wide receiver is like
Darnell Mooney.
Yeah, it's like Darnell Mooney.
And like 2 of those 3 backs he drafted rounds 1, 2, or 3 injured by like week 6, and he's just like struggling. He's in the bottom of the standings, and he's like, and he does the trade where he like trades one of his running backs for a shitty receiver. So that's what he is. I agree with you. And he also within that he was like, yeah, perfect world. I like that Mara impression you do. I'm trying to copy it because
that was pretty good. That what you just did right there.
You just got to get deep, I guess, and just do it like that. But perfect world. I still think we have to sign him. And he didn't even say like, then we have to. He's like, well, then what are we going to do? Draft a running back high? Like, he's like, the only other option I can think of here is draft a running back high. It's like, if we don't get Barkley, what can we do? It's draft one high. It's like, no, dude, there are other options here. Build your offensive line. Also, your offense isn't going to be, he's like, we're losing a big chunk of our offense if we lose Barkley. Yet guess what? That offense sucked. It scored the fewest points last year since ever in Giants history. And the year before, it wasn't much better. That was their best year. Then 2020 wasn't better. 2019, 2018, they never scored points with Barkley. What do you care about losing this chunk of your offense? Let's go for a different offense. Get big. Like, what?
I want to put on the conspiratorial New York Giants fan hat that I was mentioning before and say maybe John Mara reacted that way because he's not as sold on the passing attack. And Tim McDonald also made a quote similar to that. It's like, whoever the quarterback is, say it's Daniel Jones, we got to be like a run first. He said something to that effect. And I think you can interpret that a couple different ways, but it also could be certainly interpreted like, hey, we have a quarterback who can't carry the load. And maybe that's what John Mara was basically in his mind and behind the scenes, obviously not mentioned on camera. It's like, I don't know if we could trust having a quarterback without a star running back. And I think that's conspiratorial, but it's also fun to just throw it out there and see how people react to it.
It's not the worst idea, Nick, because I think what we've always talked about it's important to bring
and also,
up
I just want to say conspiratorial wouldn't really make sense in that because there's no conspiracy. People aren't like working together. But it's just like, it's something. It's reading into something that might not be there. Yeah. Tinfoil hat's better.
Exactly. Yeah, tinfoil hat, we'll call it. But you know what? I think it's actually a strong take, and not saying it's right, but it's possible because remember with Mara, I've said this before, but it's so important to reiterate. His ideal goal is very different than ours, Nick. You know how we are. We want them to build a roster that can compete for a Super Bowl every year. His goal is to put together a good team that fills the stadium out where we get to those final home games, those last two, and the stadium is filled with Giants fans and they're cheering and they can get to 9-8 and hit the last wild card 7 spot. He doesn't really care much past then, but he needs them to be in that wild card mix every year so he can. So to him, if he feels better when those seats, the stadium is filled with Giants fans at the end of the season. It's very important to him. So for him, he's like, shit, we're going to lose Barkley. Now our offense is going to be really bad. How the hell am I going to fill these seats? And I don't think he thinks of it from a money standpoint. It's more just like an ego standpoint of like, we're not the laughing stock of the NFL. He's more concerned with not being the laughing stock than being the actual champion contender every year, in my mind at least. So I think it's part of it.
I think ideally he would love to be the champion. It's just it's unrealistic. It's very difficult for you to be a perennial. There's how many teams have been a perennial over the last
good question.
Years. There really hasn't been many that have.
I wonder what we would answer that with. Like going into last year, we would say the Niners. I would say all of Niners, Bills, Bengals, and Chiefs. You could say no to Bengals, but I would say Burrow got hurt. That doesn't count. If he's there, they're in the mix every year. Those 4, I would say for sure. I don't know if we add any. Some people would say Baltimore because I
would say Baltimore because of their defense and Lamar, and they've kind of like let down relative to like the amount of talent they have. But they're always competitive. And then you have like weird teams like Miami Dolphins. It's like, I don't
that I wouldn't count yet, perennial,
but like, they're very exciting and they're very fun and there's a lot of momentum around them and their coaches is
Eagles deserve in the mix.
Of course.
Sort of though. They really haven't done it though. It's crazy. They're supposed to. The NFC, this is a good bar for the Giants fans. We need to think if you're thinking long term a little bit, a little 30,000 foot view. The NFC doesn't have that many perennial contenders involved besides the Niners and kind of the Eagles, though I feel a little weird about this Eagles roster going forward. They've dished out a lot of money. They have a lot of void contracts coming up. Jalen Hurts takes up a lot of cap. Barkley takes up a lot of cap. Their O-lines, they're not getting younger than the O-line. They're having like.
I don't know anything about this really, but is that lawsuit that the NFL is suffering through with NFL Sunday Ticket going to affect the salary cap at all?
Who tweeted that? Justin Pugh actually just tweeted that out.
I know I saw that somewhere, but I was thinking about it too because I got NFL Sunday Ticket as well, so I guess I'm entitled to something.
You're gonna get like $240, I think.
Either way, I don't know if this is a class action lawsuit. I'm not even 100% sure what the issue was, but will that actually affect the cap? Is this like insured by some sort of insurance company that the NFL has? Like, I'm unaware.
I don't know.
But if it does, like, could you imagine if like it somehow affected these teams that were? I don't think it would be, but if it somehow affected those teams that have been kicking the cap can like crazy down, and who have been like the Saints and the Eagles. I don't think so, but
that's what Pugh says. He says it's going to hurt the Browns and Eagles because they rely heavily on the cap increasing every year. I don't know if he's right.
Justin Pugh was saying that.
That's Justin Pugh saying. I don't know if he's right, but that's what he tweeted out. He said they've hit on those players and it's worked out. They've done a ton of front loading cash and spreading out signing bonus, but this Sunday ticket lawsuit could impact the salary cap, which in turn would hurt teams like the Eagles and Browns because they rely heavily on the cap increasing every year. So it is true. Like if the NFL gets crushed by this suit, they're not going to keep increasing the cap. Like it's going to stay stagnant for a little while and then bounce back up. So it is interesting to think about because the Giants have been cap healthy, which is a plus in that column, and the Eagles are the opposite of cap healthy.
Yeah. Did you think they spent too much time on the PB&Js with Joe Shane? I felt like they spent a little bit too much time talking about it.
What was better for you?
I don't think they said anything about the Schmuckers. They were obviously Schmuckers, and I'm wondering if that was like an advertising thing. Where like, we can have their image in there, but we just can't say their name.
100%. Because if you saw Shane at the East West Shrine, he was holding a cup of coffee, and it was clearly a Starbucks logo. But they like blurred it out. But like everyone in the world knows that's a Starbucks logo. So it's like, good job there, Giants. You got that one through.
I was laughing at that, and I was also laughing at Joe Shane's, what was it, his grandma or his mom saying that Sam Hartman's very handsome, and I'm just like, oh.
She's like, I might be 95, but I'm not blind, baby.
Yeah, Sam Hartman's handsome. I can't, like, I feel blessed that there are people who say I even look like him. I'm like, that's insane. Like, he's such a
you're living a good, clean life if you hear that ever from anyone. That's that's a comparison you
Most
get.
people are way too kind to me. I'll tell you that much. That's a handsome.
Take it, run with it.
What if he Kirk Cousins, Jaden Daniels? All right, we're getting off on a tangent, but
what if Kirk Cousins, Jaden? Oh my God,
yeah,
he's like,
imagine.
I can't honestly, Nick. I've seen too much Sam Hartman to think that has any chance of happening.
And I think Jaden Daniels could be like a real thing too.
I'm less about Jaden, sure on Jaden, as I am sure that Sam Hartman does not have NFL talent. No offense, he's a great looking guy.
People said this. Yeah, no, like, come on, he could do a lot.
Anyone could see that. You don't have to be grandma, whoever. Like you said, she's blind.
You ever feel sluggish or out of focus? Are you stressed? Has your digestive system caused discomfort or flatulence like a certain co-host on this podcast during a live stream? If so, you should check out AG1. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my daily health. I had more energy, I was better off at the gym, and I could focus on my work in a much more efficient manner. That's because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. Not only did I replace my multivitamin with AG1, but I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support. I recommend AG1 to all my family and friends because AG1 has a team of doctors and scientists that formulate around the latest science and maintains high quality standards within the industry. Even my friends have started drinking AG1, and they always tell me how energetic they feel and how it's helped them out at the gym, and also it's helped them manage their stress levels. That's why we're happy to have AG1 as our partner. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe. Go to drinkag1.com/banter. That's drinkag1.com/banter to check it out. Our mental and physical well-being is of the utmost importance. Whether you're a world-class athlete or a podcaster like me, we all need to take that very seriously. That's why I'm excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this episode of the Big Blue Banter podcast. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers powered by Energy Enhancement System, or EE System. If you haven't heard of the EE System yet, you'll want to listen up. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. Whether you're here in New York, New Jersey, Arizona, if you will, or hundreds of other locations across the globe, access to a center is easy and affordable. Interested in experiencing the EE System technology for yourself? Go to unifiedhealing.com/banter to learn more and find a center near you. That's UNIFYD healing.com/banter. No material or testimonials on the Unified Healing website are intended to be viewed as medical advice or a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment. And before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, include EE System.
Okay, Nick, one other thing we got some insight on finally. It's like we've needed this insight because it's been like a 2-3 year long speculation on Giants Twitter about what the relationship is from Giants owner to Giants GM. We never knew it with Dave and John. We never knew it with John Marin, who was Jerry Reese. We never knew it with a lot of these GMs, and we never knew it with John Marin and Joe Shane. There's so much speculation on Giants Twitter. We actually got to see them have conversations and talk, and we got to see what the input was actually worth. So what were your takeaways from actually getting some insight on what role John Mara actually does have over what football decisions the Giants make?
First off, again, Giants have editorial control over this, right?
Yep.
Now, John Mara is delegating to the general managers. People are watching that and they're saying, look, this is Joe Schoen making all the decisions, definitely. And I agree with that. But this is still, at the end of the day, John Mara's team. He's still the owner of the Giants. And I think if he has an idea of what he wants to be achieved, if it has to do with personnel or whatnot, I don't think Joe Schoen is just going to take that idea and be like, yeah, now 100%, this is what we're doing. But say if Joe Schoen was battling between a decision and it was, 45, 55%, and John Mara came in and maybe went on the side of the 45%, maybe it would elevate it a little bit more. Like that might be something if it's within the realm of what Joe Schoen wants to accomplish anyways, and it makes sense from a financial standpoint. I think that's where the ownership kind of comes in. But if John Mara loves JJ McCarthy and Joe Schoen didn't, I don't think necessarily John Mara is going to force Joe Schoen to draft JJ McCarthy like some of the other owners around the league.
Right. Well, yeah, I agree with you on that because I've never really felt like he was that kind of helicopter owner, if you want to use that term, like some of these owners are. I know there's been speculation among Giants fans there is, and it's with regards to Daniel Jones, Eli Manning. Obviously, he has some, say. He's not just like sitting back and being like, do whatever you want, because we saw a conversation with him and Joe about Saquon, so there's something going on there. But ultimately, I do feel confident that Joe Schoen is making these decisions, whatever they may be for the Giants.
Yes, same here. Now, I think in the past there have been decisions that were made and signed off on by John Mara, and then other decisions later on, say, let's Odell Beckham Jr. trade. I don't think Dave Gettleman had carte blanche to just trade Odell Beckham Jr. I think he probably had to get that signed off by John Mara. And then after the Lil Wayne and Josina Anderson interview, I think that kind of gave the preemptive, hey, you can trade this guy if you find a deal that makes sense. I still think that element of ownership is there, but it's still his football team. Like that, I don't think that's the most unreasonable thing, especially if the owner himself is reasonable to trust his general managers, which I believe he is, especially when you look at some of the other owners around the league.
I think that's fair. I think that's a good take. And I've never felt like we're in bad hands with Mara to an extent. It's not like the greatest owner. Yeah, but it's fine for the most part. We got to do better with the football decisions here. We got to get those are like Evan Neal has to hit. That type of shit has to happen. You can't get nothing out of a Josh Azudu. Shit like that has to, really come around, in my opinion, for a football team to turn around. And we'll see what that happens. I have one more point here. I don't know if I missed anything, and I'll let you get that at the end if we forgot anything. But I did like how Shane Bowen had that meeting where he talked about his defense. He said, what I want. He talked about, we like interior pass rushers. But he also said, our defense is going to live and die on having 4 elite pass rushers. He had Kayvon Thibodeau, inherited Dexter Lawrence, and he went out and he got Brian Burns. He now has 3, and he's getting very close to what he says allows his defense to function at its fullest, which is having a great front 4 pass rushers.
Who's that 4th guy?
For now, the hope is Azeez.
Yes. Now, I think 3rd and 6 plus, you might see Azeez Ojulari out there. I think you can use Isaiah Simmons on a money. I'm so glad, like, they deliberately put his name in there because the Giants obviously re-signed him, and they were like, 1st and 2nd down, he could play nickel in base, or he can just kind of be outside that apex defender overhang. Right. He's athletic enough to do that and guard tight ends or whatnot. And then on 3rd down, he can blitz. He can do a variety of different things for you. And I think he might be able to work into that rotation because I'm looking at the Giants depth chart. And they brought up Boogie and Ryder as we brought up a little bit earlier in the podcast. But who is that 4th guy? Say if it's, 2nd and 8, it's a passing situation. Do you want to put Azeez out there and then risk the run? If Azeez Ojulari does not anchor down as well against the run, and that kind of ends up being an exploitable part of this defense. Jordan Phillips is massive. He's not necessarily that, penetrating type of guy. It does seem like it would be Boogie Basham or Ryder Anderson, but like that's not inspiring much, is it?
No, it's not. Not for now.
Not for now. Of course, training camp could tell a different story.
We could. And I still think there's the story of, the 2 players who flashed at times last year as penetrators, mostly based on their knockback skills, which is DJ Davidson and Jordan Riley. I still think there's a potential story for those guys to be helpful on those passing downs. We'll see. I need to see more. Obviously, I need to take a huge jump, which is possible for players of their age and their inexperience in the NFL. But those guys I'm still keeping in mind as potential penetrators, especially Jordan Riley.
Also, I found it very interesting that they talked about intelligence at the linebacker position being the catalyst to the defense. And 2 base defense, Shane Bowen said 3 defensive linemen, 2 edge. So it's that 5-man front is when he's talking about base. So he's talking about like more of a 3-4 odd type of look, 2 linebackers and then defensive backs. Now, Micah McFadden and Bobby Okereke. You also got to like factor in, and I know this is a 6th-round pick, not the biggest deal in the world. Obviously, it's going to be McFadden and Okereke to start, both smart guys, both ascending guys. I think Okereke is one of the better linebackers in the league. But the Giants did draft Darius Muasau, and one of his calling cards was he's not the biggest, he's not the most athletic, but he's freaking smart. And he's really good in the box. And maybe there's more for that player, and he's not just going to be a special teamer if something ends up happening to Okereke, God forbid, and Micah McFadden.
I think that's an excellent call. I think as a sleeper right now to be one of our, you don't think it's going to happen now, but when we get to training camp, a battle that no one saw coming, and he starts getting some first team reps instead of McFadden because we don't know. It's
That's
possible.
bold.
This is obviously, I'm not saying it's going to happen. This is just like, it's one of those surprise shock things we're not even expecting now because of what you said. I mean, it's a brand new system. Whoever fits it best mentally, like you said, is going to play. And yes, McFadden eventually learned how to fit the Wink Martindale system very well because he was instinctual when he drove forward. This is a different system. And so we'll see who it clicks for faster from the mental side because they're putting a shit ton on the plate from an IQ standpoint, from a mental side of football. And they've already admitted that. The one thing I wanted to say that you said a few minutes ago, but I thought was important. I was thinking about, you mentioned overhang defender for Isaiah Simmons as a possibility. And I was thinking about when I watched him as a prospect coming out. And that was the role he played in that defense. And that was the role he thrived in. That was where he's at his freaking best when I watched him in that spot. Give him a chance to play it again. Make us, have your system fit to that skill set because that could be a big part of your defense. He was a big part of his defense in college. He hasn't been a big part of his defense in the NFL really at any point. I'm not ruling it out yet if he's put in the exact perfect role. If that's the idea that they have in mind for him to play that type of role, good. Maybe this is the defense that can bring it out. Maybe Winks wasn't.
I'm still skeptical with his run defense. Yeah. And I would hope that, it's different being out there, you have more space to operate in. He's athletic enough to do so, but you just run like crack toss that direction, pull someone around, just have crack block. Seems
like even a wide receiver can take him out in crack toss.
Yeah. It's, and like, again, man, we bring up like the Darnay Holmes of the world and no one gets excited about that, but like Darnay can hold down that edge. And we know just by stable reading. Yeah, he's smaller, but he's so much stronger, which is crazy because he's a defensive back and Simmons is technically a linebacker.
Do you think part of it is also like the way he attacks downhill toward the football is more like it's less long and lanky than the way that Isaiah Simmons comes at it? He kind of like gets low and drills in there.
Yeah, it's more fluid. I think it is
more fluid looking.
Yeah, Darnay Holmes, he packs a punch, man. He's a smaller guy, but he's direct and he can hit people very hard. Shame. And it's very important to Brian Daboll and really any NFL coach, but they made a point to add this, that the run defense is very important. And Shane Bowen had really good run defensive advanced statistics at Tennessee when he was sitting there reading it off to Joe Shane and what was probably a not scripted, but they were like, this is going to definitely make the cut,
It's just absurd.
That seemed very casual, right?
About the defensive coordinator, such like, wait a second. He's like, are you gonna call Shane? Are you gonna call him up? It's like, yeah, look at this. Went off from the job. I'm going to say, you want to be here? Look at this. He was 6th in offense, 7th. He's just like reeling numbers up. Like, Shane's like, all right, man, get him. Like, how do we do this? How do we pull this off? I didn't know until today that he was 7th in red zone defense. Thank you for letting me know. Like, what?
It was so casual looking, but they've had so many meetings up until that point discussing all the defense.
That one was for the cameras, 100%, regardless of what anyone says. That's my opinion, at least, of it. But it is what it is. It was fun. All right, Nick, anything else?
Is there anything else on Daniel Jones to say? They showed him going through rehab and just a lot of the stuff I guess we already hit on where they're just like, all right, we're paying him this. We expect him to be this. And now it's the time for him to be this. We just got to put him in an optimal situation to actualize it.
Yeah, I will say this. I don't think we touched on this part enough, and it depends what you want to make of it, because I don't know if this was another one of those staged conversations for
by the way, this is why I love this is such a different thing than we usually do, because there is like some things that you make something of this, and there's other stuff that probably is just fluff and bullshit, right? So I kind of like parsing through these and seeing
trying to figure out what's bullshit, what's fluff. Came from the scene where Joe Shane is telling his lieutenants, like, Daniel Jones has been injured this amount of years. We have this and this and this and this. And it's like all these facts they obviously already know. So that leads me to believe maybe it was just one of those scenes for HBO and for the cameras. But within it, Joe Shane mentioned, like, he's under contract for 3 years. I think you said this earlier. We got to see if he's the guy for 10 years, which at the very least kind of makes me feel. So I thought, no, I know how people are. They're going to somehow get offended by this, and it is what it is at this point. But I thought that after last season, watching Tyrod and DeVito within that offense, it would click in Joe Shane's head that you're not going to win a lot of Super Bowls allocating 20% of your salary cap to Daniel Jones. To be honest, that's just where I'm at. I felt like, yes, he could still be a solid quarterback like he was in 2022. Great before he gets the contract. But once you're handing him 20% of fifth-year salary cap, it just doesn't make sense to see a ceiling there. I thought after watching Tyrod and DeVito, to me, and I know their situations were a little different, both of them, but it was clear that, it was at worst, they were as good as Jones was in that offense, last year's offense, whatever it may be. And we don't know what Tyrod would have been in the 2022 offense. By the way, no one ever talks about that. We don't know what Tyrod. What we do know is that Tyrod was like second in explosive pass rate and like up there in the NFL and EPA from clean pockets and all sorts of that. We don't know what he would do in 2022. That's that. But point being, it doesn't feel like that after listening to this conversation. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, Nick. I don't know if it was just for the cameras, but it felt to me more like Joe Shane's like, the whole time we said we're going to give him 2 years to prove himself. And this is his second year. He still has a full clean slate to prove himself. And if he has a good enough year, Nick, even if it's not that good, I think there's a decent chance that they might just roll back in to 2025 with him at, 18, 20% of the salary cap.
Yeah, I mean, that could be an option.
They may have no options. Again,
one thing was for sure, though, it was Joe Shane wanted a contingency plan because he brought up, I think, twice that, and of course, they have editorial control. It's like Daniel Jones has finished 3 seasons with 3 season-ending injuries, I think. Well, I don't know if he said it like that, but he said he's injured.
What's the best predictor of the future, the past, in relation to Jones's injuries?
Yeah, there's a lot of injuries there, and the only season that Jones has had that was healthy was 2022, was that season, and he didn't even have a good offensive line that year, if we're going to be frank. There was one more thing I wanted to bring up. I'm just scrolling through my notes. Oh yeah, it was when I think it was Chris Rossetti was going through the running backs. The trait that they discussed that it seemed like to me that they really valued when they were discussing the running backs was decisiveness. And I found that to be interesting. And it makes sense. Decisiveness is like one of the traits that we don't really talk about a lot. Well, we do, but like the average fan doesn't really talk about too much with running backs. It's more like speed, agility, power, and things of that nature. But no, they wanted decisive runners. And they showed a couple clips of Singletary making guys miss, just linebackers over pursuing to like the D gap. And then he bounces it inside to the C gap where there's a nice timely block by a tight end. And then he's just off to the races and beats an angle out of a safety. They talked about it similar with Zach Moss. And another thing they mentioned about Zach Moss specifically was pass protection. So, that's obviously something that they're looking for. We've brought that up. We're hoping Tyrone Tracy can fill that role. With Devin Singletary specifically, though, they said he can be a passing downs back, but he's different from Moss because he's more of an underneath receiver type, a screen type of guy, and not necessarily that type of pass blocker that Zach Moss was. So I found
that was a great point.
Interesting. Yeah,
that was a great observation. I did see this though, Nick, and who knows, we don't need to go live or die by this service, but I did see in 2022 Singletary, when he had a bigger role, was the 6th best pass blocking running back according to Pro Football Focus.
From the film I saw, I thought he checked out.
Okay,
like he's good, smart, and he can identify where it's coming from, and he can get in the way. He's not like a piece of toilet paper who gets tossed aside like some running backs. Like he will get in the way. He's going to miss some, but Saquon Barkley missed some up until like 2022. He was actually pretty poor in pass protection. I would say he really rectified that in 2022, and it carried into 2023 as well.
I would agree with that, Nick. All right, that's our first recap of the first Giants Hard Knocks episode. We're going to do one every week. We got 4 more, I think they're doing 5 in total. I'm so excited for this, Nick. And again, Art Stapleton said more to come. He even said in one tweet that I think he deleted, but it's on PBI because I couldn't find this tweet from Art, but on PBI, Eric put it in there in the thread. And then I looked for Art to reference him, and then I couldn't find it. But he said that he originally went into this thing thinking that the Giants wouldn't at all talk about the quarterback pursuit, as in the trade up for Drake May and the pursuit of the quarterback. And now he's like, I'm not so sure. We might get to see a little bit of that. So I'm curious. I don't see what's there to gain for the Giants by showing the trade talks with New England, or what Joe Shane's saying behind the scenes to Brandon, like, we love May. We think he's the guy who takes over. Because now it's over. They don't have May. They couldn't get May, and they have Daniel Jones. So I don't think going into the start of their season, that's the vibe they want to put out there, to be honest. So I think all that stuff will be hidden, but Art Stapleton thinks, at least from that tweet, seems to think that we might get a little bit of that. So I'm curious to see if they put any of that in.
I say leave it out. I mean, I would love to see it personally, but what do you have to gain?
It hurts your team camaraderie. You're right.
Yeah. So but I do want to see it,
I want to see it too.
If you're an agent of chaos, you want to see that too, especially if it's like, no, dude, this is the guy, we need him.
Yeah.
I'll probably try to obfuscate it somehow and just be like, yeah, we were trading up for Malik Neighbors. That's what we were doing.
Exactly. They might do that. They very well might do that. Who knows? Yeah, it's like on the phone with New England. It's like the whole time we wanted neighbors. All right, we were trading up for a wide receiver.
Joe Old, that's what we want.
Yeah, that rumor, that was great. All right, so anyway, thanks for tuning into Boo Bander Podcast. Enjoy your 4th of July, baby. Happy 4th.
Oh, yeah.
I'm excited to enjoy it and eat terribly and drink terribly for my body, but for my happiness, it's a good short-term solution.
Let me ask you this before we get out of here. What's Dan's favorite 4th of July meal?
I like it pretty classic, just burgers and dogs. That's where I'm at.
Okay.
I'm very classic 4th of July, like getting out there in front of a grill with beers. I'm big beer over like the Trulies and stuff, and like the I'd rather just have beers.
Yeah, I don't do Trulies. I don't do beers either, though. It's always the bourbon, baby.
Yeah,
always
hard liquor.
Always a hard liquor there, kid.
Yeah. So everybody, enjoy your 4th. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.